that's not really good for you, some people might say. And when you're talking in science and some obvious things like food or air, people might accept that because it's relatively easy to recognize. You know, that sharp knife, that 2 tons of steel coming down at you. I mean, there's just self-evident things, happenings, occurrences in life that, you know, the average person, a common person would say, yeah, that's not healthy. That would get in the way of me continuing to live. But then there's all sorts of other circumstances where people will stand in the way and do things that don't preserve their lives because somebody says so. I mean, the military is trained to do that. They'll run into all sorts of deadly things, gunfire, flames, whatever. Well, firefighters do that too, and so do the police, because of duty. I mean, there's examples, or used to be examples, where the men, they'd line up on the ships, like on the Titanic, women and children first. And for the vast majority, the women and children went first. But how far do we carry that reserve, that mental conditioning, in the face of real danger, or in the face of what we might suspect is danger? If somebody handed you a glass of so-called water, but they said, this is clean, here, you're thirsty, you know, have some, and you just drink it up. But if you can see little things floating in it, you'd be like, hey, wait a minute, how healthy is that? You want some more proof, right? Well, we do that with our foods. It used to be that trans fats were common, and actually there are some trans fats in nature, but then industry started making trans fats, which don't function like the natural occurring trans fats, and they started making them in the 1950s. So from the 1950s until 2013, which is over 50 years, where I'm reading off of Wikipedia, in 2013, the United States Food and Drug Administration issued a preliminary warning determining that partially hydrogenated oils, which contain trans fats, are not generally recognized as safe. And on 16 June 2015, the FDA finalized this determination that trans fats are not generally recognized as safe. And that's how human beings function. Somebody, oh, we'll make this works. We can make margarine and all sorts of good things. They don't decay. It's, you know, get away from some of the other things that we think are unhealthy, and we'll subject the people for 50 years to something that actually we figure out contributes to heart disease, because we got away from what was natural, what was naturally occurring. Yeah, and, you know, it might have been profit, it might have been stupidity, it might have been a combination of all of it. But your trans fat, your naturally good occurring oils, natural fats, and turn it into something that kills you, and, you know, 50 years later, the government and science realizes, well, that's really not that good for you. Actually, it's killing you. It's like with cigarettes. You know, at one time they promoted it as all this. Well, no, actually, that's killing you. We should put a label on it. And it's the same with sugar. You know, they used to have more natural sugars like honey. Then they got into refining vegetable sugars. And these are just all examples of where human beings have, oh, well, we'll do this and it'll be better and we'll make money and, you know, it tastes better, feels better, or whatever. And then, you know, 50 years later, 60, 100, 200 years later, we wake up and say, well, you know, that really wasn't the best thing that we were doing. And that's science, right? Depart from what nature is doing, we make it better, and all of a sudden we realize, oh, we just screwed it up. We trans fat our fats, and we homogenize our milks, and we get into all sorts of things where it's going from one thing to another, and we think we did it right, and it's just all wrong. We don't get the good nutrients if it's food, we don't get the good vitamins or that if it's another type of food. We don't get the good sugars like honey, which your body can easily digest. We get the hard to digest refined sugars. We don't get the whole wheat bread with all of its nutrients and balance that's designed there. We get just parts of it, and then they try to put the vitamins and minerals back in so that it doesn't rot, as opposed to really respect what nature has done with the food that it presents us, and not destroy it. And if you live in the United States, it's the laws of nature and of nature's God that gives us our liberty and our food and our fresh air and that. And then we made all these other laws and rules and supposedly scientific studies and that. Well, works really good, and isn't it? Well, maybe for a moment. I mean, here's a shirt I got at college. It's a Rube Goldberg's applied machine contest where people spend all this extra energy to get things done in a silly and profound way, and you're like, yeah, but if you're actually studying engineering, going the long route to get that done really isn't the best way to do it. You've spent all this time and all this energy and wasted all this materials to get the ball to another place. Granted, you've had to obey the laws to get there, but you're not fast, you're not efficient, you're not saving money and time. It's a great big freaking complicated thing to achieve pretty much nothing, right? It's just, at best it could be called art, right? Something interesting to look at. But what if we apply that to other stuff? What if you're an engineer and you actually begin to think that way? And time and efficiency and cost savings and all of that doesn't become a factor in how you're designing things. Heck, man, you could make software that just takes hours and hours to work, and you need huge amounts of memory to make it work. Yeah, they call it bloatware. You could build ships and buildings that, wow, hey, this is really great and everything. It looks really pretty, but it takes time and money and energy, and when it could be done in a much more natural, cost-effective way. So you go from food to engineering, and I was watching this one guy who's a skeptic. He was talking about the bad things that creationists do with their understanding of the natural world. This is Mike Schimmer, something like that. He's a skeptic. But then he says, well, yeah, like with black holes, the creationists say God did it and leave it at that. It doesn't explain anything. It's not scientific. And then he stopped and he said, well, scientists do the same thing. We find this occurrence. We know that there's this event happening in space. We can see it. We don't really know exactly all the details about it. So we call it a black hole, and we assign some of the meanings to it that we think is occurring. And then we try to figure it out. But then the next guy comes along and says, oh, it's a black hole. They said it means this, and then they take that as fact, rather than a theory or a hypothesis, and then they start spouting, well, this is what it really is. I've seen that in engineering. Engineers will come in and say, well, we're doing this with this product, and it could possibly do this, and it could possibly do that, and it's most likely going to do something in the middle. And then you hand it to marketing people, They take it out, and you hear them talking to a customer, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, we've got this product in play, and it'll do this, 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 and this definitely." And you want to grab those marketing people and pull them back, and he says, "It might be able to do that, and it's going to cost this amount of money. Don't tell them we're actually going to do it." Actually, I worked at a medical company where a marketing person did that, and they went ahead and they sold a device that wasn't completed, that the company I worked for decided, well, we can't actually sell that and make money. I mean, it can physically be done, like that. It can actually physically be done, but it's not profitable. And it's hard to support. But you get the marketing guys out there, they grab it and they're all blah, 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 and they sell it. And you're like, well, you could lose your shirt, if you're in business and you design and try to do that kind of stuff. So where does it end? Trans fat, homogenized milk, refine your sugars to the place that they function like cocaine. But it's all science. It seemed good. Well, like they said though, the religions do the same thing. If you know the original Hebrew, or know some of the original Hebrew, or at least know somebody who knows the original Hebrew, the name should be Yahshua, which should be translated into English as Joshua. But, over the years, they just called him Jesus. I see religions do the same thing, like people do with food, and some people do with science, and it's not exactly. And then they add back into all their meanings and stuff. When if you take the biblical example, Joshua, there was a biblical Joshua in the Old Testament, part of the Tanakh, right? He actually did a certain function in the nation of Israel, which the Bible, God uses as a foreshadowing of what's going to occur. So if you get rid of the name of Jesus and go to Joshua, you have this old covenant, Old Testament, if you want to call it that, Tanakh example. So you know something about what Jesus was doing. He was bringing people into a promised land, the kingdom of God, everlasting life, joyful existence. So if you're a non-Christian, you can understand, well, they did it with fats, they've done it with milk, they've done it with sugar, they do it in science, and they do it in religion too. They speculate. They don't know for sure, but a lot of the myths and legends are just that, just a hypothesis or part of the truth, and then somebody goes ahead and develops it into, well, that's the way it is. There used to be sayings that if you're making a sword and you shove it through a slave, the sword will be stronger. Well, scientifically, it's similar to taking a sword. You beat it out and everything, and it's hot. You stick it in the water, and it changes the molecular structure of the steel, and it makes it stronger if you're doing that. Well, hey, some guy probably, and it's just speculation. Some guy didn't have any water, so he just stuck it through a slave, Yeah, it's about the same. You're not wasting the metal, right? And back then, they didn't care about people. Well, some people still don't care about people, but you can see how something that's scientific can be turned into a really, really horrible habit. Kind of works, but water works just fine. So you get back to what religions do with the original text and the original teachings, and they got a name for it. It's called the cult. They don't stick with what the original founder meant, the original intent of the teachings. They just translate them into something to what they want it to mean. Just like they translate translate the fat into something, oh, well, we can use it and everything, but it actually becomes unnatural. Just like they homogenize milk and they refine the sugars, and then they even do that with honey. You can take a good natural product and heat it up and do stuff with it, and you just destroy its naturally beneficial properties. The same way with butter. You know, that's a milk product. You can process things, you can translate things, you can transform things to where they're just not natural, they're not healthy. They become whatever you want them to mean, which may or may not be useful, may or may not be healthy. Religions do it too. For example, a lot of Christian religions, they say they have pastors. They take a Greek word and they assign a meaning to it, right? And a title, well, it should be sounded this way, and it means that. But if you actually look at the Greek, it's shepherd. Oh, but if we call these people shepherds, well, that actually has meaning. You can't fool somebody about what a shepherd is. That's gotten meaning all over the place. But if you translate that word, you just get out your hammer and beat on it and call it something else, whether it's accidental or just a bold-faced lie, well, then you can get these offices and these titles and these positions that aren't natural. They're fake. I mean, they're not like glasses where they actually help you do something better. I mean, people can put on fake beards and fake mustaches and hide how they really look. It's not natural, it's just fake. So you got the Christian world doing the same thing as the scientific world, as the rest of the secular world with food, science, and religion. So who's translating stuff for you? Who's working on it for you? Who's your smith, your processor of things? Yeah, in Wisconsin, we make lots of cheese. Grandpa used to be a cheesemaker. I know a little bit, heard stories. Now they got this stuff out, it's called cheese food. You can go in it with a knife and pull it out and spread it, and cheese spread, and you're like, that's not real cheese. Real cheese, you know, it becomes hard. It's not smooth and creamy and all that. You gotta melt it up to do that. Well, you gotta put a lot of chemicals in it and all sorts of other things, so it's really not just cheese anymore. Just like, because I come from a Christian faith, I know about that. It's just not what the Bible says anymore. It's just not the doctrines of Jesus Christ anymore. Because he said, there will be one shepherd, and he was it. If you look up the word shepherd and you look up how it applies in the Bible, there's one shepherd, Jesus. He says, my sheep hear my voice. They don't listen to another. So there's not other shepherds. There's a lot of sheep with gifts. He says, you're all my sheep. You're all my servants. Yeah, if you go back into what the Bible actually says, well, if you go back into what science really actually knows, not what they hypothesize or they theorize about, what they can actually demonstrate and prove, you realize, as badly as they translated the word pastor or Jesus, which should be Yeshua, the shepherd, they've done the same dishonest or failure to say, well, this is really just a hypothesis. We think it's this way. Or this is a theory. We've got a little bit more proof than a hypothesis, but it's really not a law. It's not a fact. You know, it's not a theorem or a postulate, which we know works, but we can't really quite prove. We know it works. You know, it's demonstratable. It's testable. We don't know how, but that's science and engineering. You know, but if they get up there and they start spouting stuff and, oh, it happened long ago and far away, and we're just assuming all of the decay rates are the same and everything's been consistent as it is today, which we know it isn't, because I mean, I can prove that you can make carbon decay at different rates. Actually, we have formulas that prove time doesn't matter. It's temperature and pressure in diamonds. See, that's how simple the math works. That's how simple science works. You can go look up the formulas, and we can make diamonds in a matter of a few days or a few weeks. I mean, the math is there, the formula is there. It doesn't take thousands or millions of years. I mean, you could take thousands of years to make a diamond because you're changing your time and your pressure. It's just like cooking meat. Oh, sure, you can take, what, we'll guess, 7 minutes to cook this steak if it's that thick, right? Well, that's here at this pressure and this temperature. If you heat up the temperature, increase the temperature, well, it'll take long. It won't take as long to cook. And if, like we learned in a restaurant, you take some great big steel weight, like bigger than your wallet, and you put it on top of it so you got weight and heat, and you confine it, well, then you can cook meat quicker. And that's just carbon. Get it into another state, right? Where people like it. So if you can cook your carbon at different rates, and if you leave your meat out on the table, it's going to decay at a different rate than if you toss it in the refrigerator. So our environment is constantly changing the decay rate of your carbon. And if we apply the natural processes to compressing the carbon, we can get coal and oil and the things in between and diamonds. And we got math formulas. We know it. So to say that it takes thousands or millions of years to make a diamond is just scientifically and mathematically wrong. It's a lie. Unless you're ignorant, then you're just spouting ignorance. So think about it. The skeptics do it, the scientists do it, the religions do it, the health people do it. Trans your fats, translate your Hebrew, or translate your Greek. It all becomes just some human beings working on something else to say it's what? It is what it is. And they know that. And some people are ignorant, but then the young people come along and they're like, well, or the people who don't know, I've been there, I've done that. They can still do that to me if I'm not careful. They can still do that to you. You can be deceived. You think the person knows what they're talking about, and you better go look it up. Don't believe me, go check the books. I got a book back here that Fundamentals of Thermodynamics talk about the diamonds. You can go on Wapika and find out the stuff about the trans fats and the honey and the sugars and the flour. You don't have to be ignorant. You don't have to be deceived. In fact, that's part of the good message that Yeshua, the Messiah, or Joshua, if you want to translate it correctly, said. You don't have to be deceived. You just don't have to be. It takes a little bit of work. You got to be humble and say, oh, well, man, this guy could be lying to me. Accidentally or intentionally. There could be factors that I'm not seeing. Recently, I watched a YouTube video about what really happened to the Titanic. And they went through and they did all these tests. And, well, the rivets, some of them popped, but not all of them popped. And they go through all of the hypotheses and theories that people had about the Titanic sinking. And it's a perfect example. There were eyewitness accounts that said it broke in half. But the official log at the time was it stayed whole, went down as a whole ship. And we had this illusion that it was sitting at the bottom of the ocean as a whole ship. Until you actually got down there and, did some investigation, did some real science. It's like, well, no, actually the thing split in half. Just like the original eyewitnesses said that the official log said, well, no, we'll ignore that. We'll ignore the eyewitness accounts. Oh, they're just people. They're not science. They're not officials. You know, we'll just write it in there. That's what we do. Write history the way we want it to be. And then you're stuck. Because if you didn't know any better, I remember believing, oh yeah, that was, but it wasn't true. So we all get into this group thinking and group lies and group delusions. And then somebody will pipe up and they'll go, oh, no, you don't want to bother the governing experts, you know. The guys could lose their jobs and their reputations. Well, they lose their reputations and their credibility, and then they lose their jobs. Well, and then they lose their houses and their friends and all sorts of stuff, you know. Their profits, their pleasures, and their praises. But go look it up for yourself. You don't have to be deceived. You have to sort through stuff. But they're all parables of what really happened. But then even at that, and I'm looking at the Titanic thing, and they're like, well, no, the ship really wasn't that bad. The ship actually did fairly well. I mean, it was only designed to stay afloat for an hour after it got hit, and they kept it. No, they say, oh no, the ship managed to stay afloat for over 2 hours, you know, and something. But again, their point was to not point out and find the reality of what the ship itself contributed. And then they go and they miss what the engineers who didn't get off the ship actually did, because that ship did not stay afloat on its own. It didn't stay afloat on its own. There were engineers in there doing everything they could to keep the power running, which when I watched the film they managed to miss. The ship itself wasn't as bad as what people made it out to be. But even at that, it took human beings in there to keep it afloat, to keep it stable. Physical things need an assistance. I mean, there's laws and everything in nature and that'll determine how our natural world functions. But even within that, human beings can act to make it better or worse. Because you've got other ships that, you know, they hit a rock or something and the captain jumps aboard and the ship turns over on its side and you're done. And then you got the Titanic, it smashes into an iceberg and that thing stays perfectly stable so that all of the lifeboats can launch. So you've got captains and crews who can either abandon ship and let you tip over, or they can keep it all stable so everybody else gets out. So they can work within the laws of nature and of nature's God to save lives in bad situations. Or they can work within the laws of, and massacre the laws of nature and produce trans foods, which 50 years later, 60 years later, oh yeah, that really wasn't good for you. But I've been eating this crap for 60 years, and you were telling me it was good. You know, we were breathing in the DDT, the cigarette smoke, you know, refined sugars rather than honey. It's like, why the heck should I trust you anymore? We have so much knowledge out there, we can just go read it ourselves if we're not so busy working, paying for all the debt. This is the US now. That our wise government, who knows more than us, is causing. So, take your pick. You can go along with the crowd and just believe their hypothesis and their theories and how they translate and trans fat your food, process the life out of it, and call it good. Or you can go to the books and take some time to study rather than sitting in front of mindless entertainment. Yeah, it's your choice. Enjoy. But be careful. Go prove it for yourself. Look up your thermodynamics book. Look up your Bible and see how it's really read. I mean, people know. People know. They know that they've documented the history. This is a book on. That's a timeline. We know from today back to all this written history. It's only 5,000 or 6,000 years. That's what we have is documented history. We know it. Both religions and seculars know it. We know this stuff. It's in the book. Thermodynamics. Doesn't take freaking thousands and millions of years to make diamonds. Oh, look. They wrote the book. They lived with dinosaurs. You can open it up. Look, dragonflies lived with dinosaurs. You can't see it. They Lived with Dinosaurs by Russell Friedman. I got it from the library because it's so old they just don't want it on the shelves anymore. But they know, they've proven it. Here's another one. Oh yeah, the possum. Possum lived with dinosaurs. It's still alive today. Hasn't changed. They know this stuff doesn't change. Oh look, there's a bird, a grebe, right? Lived with dinosaurs. Hasn't changed. I see him down by the lake all the time. So we got evidence that the freaking animals don't change. It's in the fossil record. There's a whole bunch of stuff actually. They know that stuff. They just might want to support their hypotheses and theories, you know. They got jobs, power, and position. Well, somebody probably knew that fat wasn't the best way of serving it to you. I mean, they could have done good science. Yeah, so don't be deceived. Because, well, I got a whole bunch of books. I won't go through them all. Well, here's one last one. Because they used to talk about how big T-Rex was, when actually, after much more science, and it's nice that they admit they were wrong. I wish the people in the religions would admit that they got it wrong too. But here, you can look at it. It's a New Dinos Discovery book, written by Shelley Tanaka and illustrated by Alan Bernard. You can look. That's how a T-Rex actually ran. Kind of like those two-wheel vehicles out there. I forget the name of it that people ride on. And if you read it, they were only 10 or 11 feet at their hips. And we know that elephants and mammoths and mastodons, which are a little bit bigger, are like 10, 11, 15 feet at their shoulders, right? So actually a T-Rex is not any taller than an elephant. It's not this huge, monstrous, 30-foot tall meat eater. So go look it up. Because science is getting around and saying, hey, wait, we didn't understand that correctly. And some people in religions are getting around, hey, wait, we didn't translate that correctly. And eventually some people will get back to the truth. Be honest. Say, oh, well, yeah, trans fats really aren't good for you. I'm sorry you ate the garbage for the last 50 years. Can't help you there. But what about all the other stuff that goes into your mind in that? Oh, well, sorry about that. You've been doing that or thinking that wrong for 50 years. You can say to the young people coming up who are spouting the same stuff, well, hey, this is really... No, it's not. I managed a deli one time, and the salesperson came in, just like that marketing person who sold that piece of medical electronics. Here's soup that we made in our building and froze it in plastic, and it's going to taste as good as the stuff you can make on the stove out of fresh vegetables. I'm like, no, it won't. I've been there. It doesn't. You can put chemicals and garbage in it that'll fool your taste buds, but it doesn't actually taste as good because of the process that it went through. And you might have destroyed its actual health value, like they do to sugar. Because you take the sugar in the plant, and it's still in the plant, and hey, that's still pretty good. You refine it and it's like cocaine. So we have all these natural examples where they process the goodness out of it and then try and replace it with good marketing. Fool your brains then, as they're fooling your taste buds. And Yeshua said, don't be deceived. With a little work and some prayer and just being honest, you don't have to be deceived about the trans fats. You don't have to be deceived about the sugars. You don't have to be deceived about the dinosaurs or the diamonds. You just don't have to be. So don't let them translate what's real into something that's just one great big freaking amusement.